Hello everyone, welcome to the Mental Health Prevention Summit Breakout Session 3. We're going to be talking about COVID-19 and the impact on children and young people and their mental health. We've got a great selection of panel members to help us with this discussion, but please do put all of your questions in the Q&A box on the side. Just to make you aware, apart from the panelists and our presenters, you are all on mute and not visible to others. The Q&A function is just like the one in the main session that's just finished. You should be able to see this on the right hand of your screen. We're going to be posting 2 questions in there for you as we go through, and we'd really like your responses so these can be put back to the presenters. And of course, you can add your own questions and comments as well. We probably won't have time to read out all of the responses, but we are recording this session and there will be a write-up sent out to everybody that's attended. So welcome everyone, my name's Emma, I work at South London and Maudsley and I'm going to be your host for the next half an hour. I'm going to start by introducing our presenters. We have Gregor Henderson, Director of Mental Health and Wellbeing, Public Health England. We have Councillor Jack Hopkins, Leader of Lambeth Council. Sophia Pulido, who's an expert by experience. Esthers Standing, who's also an expert by experience. Jeremy Walsh, Managing Director of South London Partnership. And Martin Wilkinson is Lead Mental Health Commissioner for South East London. So first of all, we're going to hear from Ezra, and I'm just going to bring her onto screen now. And then that's going to be followed by Sophia. So over the next few minutes, they're both going to share their stories. So thank you, Ezra. You are now live.
Hi, I'm Ezra. I'm 18 and this is my experience of the COVID-19 crisis. Imagine everything that you've been working towards for the last 2 years. Always stressing over essay deadlines, the constant anxiety about whether you revised enough. All that time you spent hunched over a textbook and having no sense of a personal life. All being rendered useless and pointless in a matter of seconds. I was in year 13, so school year whose A-level exams just got cancelled. My entire life purpose of the last 2 years came crashing down in a matter of seconds, with Boris Johnson's announcement about the closing of schools and cancelling exams in March. Young people lost their friends, their education, their futures, the people they confide in, their escape and their distraction from everyday life, all instantaneously, and were given just 2 days for some kind of closure. For me, it was some kind of goodbye and graduation. I left school and became an adult almost overnight. It wasn't just about losing my education, or the worry about how I'd get my exam results, or if I would even be able to get into university. It simply wasn't about the traditional function of school. It was about the fact that you lost your escape and your support. And with me being year 13, and no longer feeling as if I was in education, I didn't feel as if I had any right to ask for help. About a month into lockdown, by which time I'd cleaned every room in the house, learned how to cook, and tried and failed and given up on how to learn Spanish. And lockdown was really starting to get to me. Teenagers have never exactly had the best mental health. Between school and exams, media, family pressures and more, anxiety and stress become your 2 best friends. But now there's no distractions, no one to talk to, no stress relievers. Dealing with mental health was only something I've really been able to start to recently deal with, having been told that all I really needed was some more freedom, and that would just come with starting university. And in the meantime, my exams would be a great source of distraction. But suddenly, all that was gone, being stuck at home with nothing to do, no distraction from letting your mind wander into the back of your head, where you try to ignore all stuff there, spending 24 hours a day with your parents, having no freedom, and not having had a private conversation in 74 days. All this just starts to make you feel numb, and no amount of Netflix will distract you anymore. Even when schools go back properly, my year won't be going back. There will simply be no point. And with all universities all slowly starting to say the same thing, that courses will only ever be online in September, people like me don't really have any hope. We don't see an end date to all of this. In the meantime, we're just drifting, and are starting to lose both our identity and our motivation. With nothing to do, no purpose, and all the time in the world, everyone's anxieties have become constant. I live on the opposite side of London to all of my friends, so no amount of easing of restrictions are going to help me see them. It's going to be a very long time before social uses of public transport will be allowed, and therefore a very long time before I can have a physical conversation with someone I can relate to. Yes, I could spend all of my time learning new languages, taking online courses and having Zoom nights with my friends, but lockdown has made me lose my motivation to do anything. Young people are simply drifting and have lost all hope of an end date. Young people are often consulted, but very rarely actually listened to. We need to make sure that we actually have a seat at a table. We have no say in anything at the moment, but we should have a say in our own sport. Thanks.
Thank you, Esther. That was brilliant. I'm just going to hand over to Sophia now. Hopefully she will be able to hear us. And Sophia, if you're ready, you're now live.
Okay. So, should I start, right?
Yes, go for it, Sophia.
Okay. So, I'm Sophia, a 16-year-old teenager living in a worldwide hard time. I'm a student at St. Gabriel's College, a part of the group Summer Levels, a group of Spanish-speaking young people campaigning for change. In this lockdown, I have experienced a mixture of emotions, even though I have support from my parents to prepare mentally. This came and cost us of what we were mentally or physically prepared. I had my 15th birthday in the middle of the lockdown. I was a strange feeling. I was glad because I was with my parents, but what about plans, family, and friends? Another difficult situation was that I've never saw the necessity to use a computer before, so there was a drastic change to get used to it. I felt overwhelmed, trapped, shaky, and at the same time concerned. But getting into thinking deeply, my situation wasn't bad compared to some of my friends, such as sharing toilets with 4 or 5 families of strangers, living in a small room confined to a house with an awful relationship with parents, or even not having the desire to continue studying. These circumstances really have an effect on making a dreadful lockdown. During some time, I've been thinking about some good ways to help others, even ourselves. One idea is a journal for young people, like a time capsule where reason to write a letter to yourself, and in a year or even less, you write another one and then compare your feelings and the process of everything. In my opinion, we need to strengthen our mental health so we are more resilient. This is like a marathon. We are going to get tired, it will be hard, we will experience pain, we haven't been and it won't be easy, but we know it. We need to be ready for this, and how do we get ready? It's something we need to plan to learn more about, such as home activities like gardening, sewing, cooking, things that we do at home. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia.
Thank you, Sophia. That's brilliant. And thank you both to Ezra and Sophia for sharing your stories with us today. And we really appreciate you being so open and honest about how you're feeling at the moment. And just as we start to get some questions through from our Q&A, we're just going to kick off with our first question. And I'm going to go to Jeremy to answer this first one. So our question is, what do you think the impact of COVID-19 is going to be on children and young people and their mental health?
Thank you for that question, Emma. I mean, I guess we've heard, haven't we, from Ezra and Sophia directly themselves in terms of the impact that they felt. And I mean, I can't, say it better than they've said it themselves, but I certainly think that there's huge amounts of risk around loneliness and isolation and that disconnection that we've heard about. I also think that there's a group of young people who probably benefited from those sort of pastoral elements of school that they will have lost. So whether that's kind of therapeutic relationships with teachers and other members of staff and fellow students that they got from school, but there will have been elements of school dinners and structure and containment that those young people will have really benefited from in attending school, and that loss from their lives will impact on them in particularly difficult ways that we're going to need to think carefully about.
Thank you, Jeremy. Martin, I'm going to bring you up next. We've got a question from the audience here. How do we ensure that there's thoughtful commissioning for children and young people from a very young age? And how do we make sure that preventative work is done with families when children are younger, so it's not left until really late when any problems or issues may get worse?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question in terms of how we work with early years provision and with parents, and how do we listen to what they need and respond, because clearly children are a wide age group in terms of the ages that they cover, their understanding of the information, what's going on at the moment, and sort of their experiences. Clearly there's a role for, I'm representing the sort of health services, but there's clearly a role for us working together with councils and provision through schools, thinking about the perinatal sort of mental health offer, sort of really early mental health offer for making sure that families are as stable as possible, that mental health is looked after and nurtured in those early years. I think the other bit is sort of how we support activities and other sort of well-being and physical activity and other things that are related to mental health. Now, clearly that's difficult at this time, but how we build that in. I think for me throughout this, it's how we listen to young people and how we respond to their needs, and how we work across community, voluntary sector, as well as statutory services to respond to those. So I think it's a really important question in terms of the really young children and parents as well, and supporting parents with information and advice and support.
Brilliant, thank you. I've got another question that's, well, not a question, but a point here, which I'm going to put to Gregor. They've said such a critical point made by Ezra that all too often young people are consulted but not listened to. How can we make sure that as we are responding on a public health level to COVID-19, to make sure that the voices of children and young people are actively included and listened to?
Wow, thanks Emma for giving me the easy one, and thanks also to Ezra and Sophia for sharing their lockdown stories. God, that's such a difficult one. I mean, it's going to sound really trite, but opportunities for not just consultation, but active consultation really need to be embedded in the DNA of organizations that do that. And whether it's an educational organization or a health or a social care or public health or a voluntary organization, I myself have had lots of experience of listening forums. And then when it comes to the decision making, the listening forum is just one of a number of different voices that we would listen to in a decision making forum, and it just doesn't feel good enough. And I think the only way to counteract that is a system of consistent feedback. So it is about wired into the DNA of an organization that there is not just listening, but there's active action on the listening. And when that cycle doesn't seem to be evident, then there needs to be checks and balances in it. But you can make involvement and engagement fun. And I think one of the things that we miss out in terms of our educational purpose, whether it's at school or college or university, is the absolute joys of participation, the benefits we get to our own well-being, the impacts we can make in our communities of being involved and playing an active role. And how do we encourage people to do that unless we give them the literacy, the confidence, and the experience that their voice is listened to from an early age? So I think it's absolutely essential for democracy, and I would even call it a kind of democratic literacy, that if we aren't listening to the voices of people that are using our services or we're providing services for, then we're not actively promoting local democracy or civic participation. And I just think it is really as fundamental as that. And I think we need to go beyond the 70s, 80s and 90s, listening to people with lived experience to actually co-production and wiring that into the organisation. And I know many organisations are doing that effectively and are doing that well. So we need to learn from the best, but it has to be something that's wired all the way through what we do.
Thank you very much. And that sort of leads us on to another question that's coming up. I'm going to put this to Jack. So when we're talking about co-production and making sure that voices are heard throughout the sort of process of designing, delivering services, how do statutory services work with other types of organisations that might be closer to the ground or might be able to work more closely with children and young people to make sure that those voices can be heard? So the statutory sector working with voluntary sector or community groups or other types of groups.
Okay, that's a really good question, and I also pass my thanks on to Ezra and Sophia for your experience. And I don't know if Sophia's still there, but I'm sure Miss Lopez is going to be really proud of you for that from St Gabriel's. And I suppose that's part of the answer. You know, I was in a conversation with a teacher from St Gabriel's the other day who's part of Lambeth Citizens, who was relaying exactly these concerns that her young people are facing around loneliness, around disconnection, around worrying about exams. And I suppose it's partly what Gregor said, is how do you make sure that everyone gets a part in the decision making? So it's not just a relationship where professionals like Martin or Gregor will go and have a conversation with some people and then take it away. How are we making sure that the things that are needed by people are provided out there and that they're shaped by people, rather than a kind of catch-all policy where we try and sit in the town hall and decide this is what we think is going to be needed. I also think that it's partly around what are the opportunities that are out there, and there's less distinction between services that people need that are provided by statutory services and the things that people need generally that are non-statutory. There's so much crossover into that. And if young people, for example's mental well-being is not being paid attention to, if their peers are not able to talk to each other, if they don't have the space, if the professionals that work with them, whether they're teachers or youth workers, if their parents aren't able to engage with their children, and then we'll never quite get those solutions. Things then get worse, and then we need statutory services. I think if we get in there early, we're creating a culture where people are talking to each other about their challenges, which might be about work, money, it might be about stress, it might be about lack of safety on a particular set of streets, or it might be worrying about free transport and how you're going to see your friends, you know, and so there are so many different things that are all personal to individuals and probably reflected amongst their peer group. So that's about making sure that people get to challenge those things, get to say, well, what are the solutions? How am I part of the decision-making process? So consultation about services isn't just something that we do. We're in constant dialogue to shape what's going on around people, whether that's businesses, whether that's academic institutions, professionals, and people who solve stuff within the community themselves. You know, the estate that I live on in Lambeth, in the Oval, you know, we look after each other. We knock on each other's doors. We say hello to each other. We do shopping for each other. We take in each other's parcels. Those low-level things that are kind of the basics of how people look after each other are so important. And the COVID crisis has really kind of exposed to everyone living here that some people are under stress, and we can't stand by and let that go on anymore. You know, I know residents who didn't realise there were people who lived across the road from them for the last 10 years were going to a food bank. Why not? 10 years, that's a long time. So I think it's about the dialogue, it's about ongoing, it's about opening up the kind of what things are needed, and then making sure that as agencies we're shaping services around people's experience rather than shaping them around how we think what we have to provide and what we think we should provide.
Thanks, Jack. That leads us really greatly actually on to our second question, which I'm going to put to Ezra first. So our second question is, what do we think is the sorry, I've got that there. What do you think is the top priority that we need to work on together over the next 12 months to help children and young people manage their mental health due to COVID-19? But I think actually from Ezra's point of view, I guess there's a lot more broader things that may be a priority rather than a specific mental health service or mental health offer. As Jack said, there's lots of different things that people are dealing with right now. So it'd be really great, Ezra, if it's possible to hear what you think would just be your #1 priority for having a bit more support or a bit of help over the next sort of 12 months as we continue to grapple with COVID-19.
Yeah, I think people just need conversations. Like, schools are doing an amazing job, but they're only one organisation and they have so many people to deal with and their own mental health to deal with. But we need people who are willing to actually have a conversation with us. Not even to actually do anything about that conversation, just to have a conversation, because people simply just don't have anyone to talk to anymore. Like, even like a 2-minute conversation with someone who understands could do so much. Like, it doesn't matter if they can act on it, if they can even help, just someone who's there to listen, because your parents are great, but they're not always the best people to actually have conversations with or to confide in, and they're the only people you can actually really have a conversation with at the moment. So just someone who's willing to listen, and for people and young people to know there's people willing to listen to them. I think that would be a great place to start.
Thank you, Ezra, that's brilliant. And we've got a question really, which I'm going to put to Jeremy now, which is sort of related to that around peer support. So we've had a couple of points around peer support for children, young people, saying that's really, really key, but there can be safeguarding issues, can be overwhelming if children need additional support. What do you think could be possible in providing or making sure that young people are able to get support from other young people at this time, whilst dealing with the sort of logistical issues that Ezra's mentioned there already?
Thank you, Emma. So I guess I think in terms of peer support, I think it's a really valuable resource that we need to absolutely have at the front of our mind here in South London. I think both the giver of the peer support, but the recipient of the peer support can gain so much from that. I think that we need to be really thoughtful about in the planning that we don't cede responsibility to one bit of the system too heavily, and we don't assume that the support that young people will need over the weeks and months and maybe years ahead lies within just one element of it, be that peer support. I think there's something about collaboration was a theme in the main group that we all were in a few minutes ago. So I think it's about collaboration and a coalition, if you like, and acknowledging the expertise and the value of peer support, but also acknowledging and really valuing the support that can come from schools and from statutory services. And I suppose the other thing in terms of South London, we are beneficiaries of a range of expertise. There's a range of clinical and experience and knowledge that sits within SLAM and within the local authorities and within the third sector. So I think it's working in the round around the needs of young people, but also kind of, I think, back to listening to young people and thinking about opportunities and things that they might want to contribute as peer support to their fellow young people.
Thanks, Jeremy. Leading on from that, I'm just going to go to Martin now. As a commissioner for South East London, Jeremy's spoken a lot about collaboration there, working across the system. What sort of things do we need to prioritise for the year ahead from a commissioner's perspective to ensure that the system is working together across all different types of organisations to try and make sure that the response to supporting children, young people is appropriate and takes into account all of the issues raised so far?
So I think for me, it's got to work at different levels. I think first of all, we need to do something about raising awareness of all the myriad of opportunities to join people up, whether that's online or in other ways, to help signpost people where they might need support. I think it's also then about, if people do need support, how we make sure we get the right sort of support to people as early as possible. And I know I've seen on the chat there's something about CAMS, or statutory services, and we could continue to invest in CAMS services, so child and adolescent mental health services, but also thinking about the offer that the more broader offer for emotional well-being, and how do we providers work together. So whether that's SLAM working alongside sort of the voluntary and community sector providers to really broaden out that offer in terms of how people receive support, and if they need it, expert clinical treatment. And so over the next year, I think there's something about our programmes of engaging to raise awareness. We're going to be launching a sort of awareness campaign across South East London for the next few months, really to help people connect up. We've expanded the couth.com offer, which so that council leader referenced earlier, that's available across South East London. But we need to go beyond just the online digital. We recognise that there's something about offering wider than just online. And I think for us, that's about expanding and collaborating across the CAMS offer, along with council's offer of early help, and making sure that there's joining up appropriately, that people are clear where they can get help when they need it.
Thank you. And following on from that, I'm going to go to Jack now. Specifically, we've had a question in relation to schools. So are there any plans currently across South London to reach more young people in schools? And they've said, you know, that there has been some improvement in this area compared to when they were younger, but it doesn't necessarily feel like it's enough. What sort of plans do you have in place in Lambeth and I guess across the wider South London area in order to try and reach more young people in schools?
Okay, that's a really difficult question, and obviously schools is a really tense topic at the moment and very, very political. I can't talk for Lewisham, Southwark, Croydon. I can talk about Lambeth. I suppose the way I see it is that schools and the youth sector and places where young people meet and go and their friendship networks, whether that's church, whether that's just hanging out in a park or having a game of football or whatever, all need to be better connected so that there's a bit more cross-referencing across. I mean, where I live, there's an adventure playground right next to a primary school, and you know, it took us a while to get the youth workers at the adventure playground, who literally took the kids where the kids came out of primary school into the adventure playground, to make sure that the youth workers knew what the kids were learning about that day, so that if they were dealing with a particularly difficult topic, you know, a growing against gangs and knives issue or learning about exploitation, that the youth workers could then help them and support them if they had challenges. So I think schools play a huge part in this, both in the sense that you've got teachers who, you know, really care about their kids and they're worried about them and they need to know. You've got young people who, it's a great place for young people to have their voice and to advocate, and you know, school councils, and I work a lot with Lillian Bayliss in Kennington, which is one of my local secondaries, and they're absolutely phenomenal at asking me to do things and to try and change the world for them and to try and connect stuff. So I think there's a real local connection point, which is around voice and organisation. I think probably through the summer, and this maybe goes to Ezra's point and some of the conversations we're having around collaboration. We've got these great big buildings in schools that aren't open throughout the summer. We've got a whole bunch of young people who want to finish some learning or catch up on their learning or get together in a safe way. We've got youth organisations out there, and Lambeth is, you know, we've got fantastic youth sector. How can we join that up in a safe way so that young people can get together and you know, meet each other, talk to each other, do activities, not fall back, regain some hope, and really that's about people. So the teachers, the youth workers, the young people themselves, we need to make those efforts to make it happen. In the council, I can put out a policy which says we must collaborate more, but ultimately it's about how do we make sure that people are sitting in the same room, literally or virtually, and wanting to work together and making that as easy for them as possible. I will say that there was one other point that in an earlier question, there is a massive funding challenge for all of this that has not been touched on and talked about, and it's worth flagging that we know that we need to support youth sector. because the preventative work and the enrichment, or however you describe it, we know that we need to support schools. Everyone's had their budgets cut by government over 10 years of austerity as a result of the banking crisis, funnily enough, and us in the public sector and the youth sector suffered because a load of bankers did the wrong thing. This time, through no fault of our own, COVID, what we can't see is that all of those things that bind us together, that have helped us get through this so far, fall by the wayside. So we really do need to pull together to work out what kind of society we want to live in, and how we're going to collaborate. As Martin and Gregor and others have said, and Jeremy, is, you know, how do we collaborate in a way that's centered on what people actually need, and how do we put them in the driving seat so that they're able to express what they need, and that we can then respond to them rather than do our thing that we would normally do.
Thanks, Jack. And following on from that, I'm just going to put the last question now to Gregor. So if we're thinking about, it's been mentioned, you know, everybody knows that prevention is key, schools, youth work, but not necessarily having the time or the space to focus on that, whilst also trying to do everything else. How can we make sure that public health is seen as a priority, and that keeping people well is seen as a focus, and how do we support the different people to do that? One of the comments we've had is, you know, teachers are really overwhelmed. It's a lot of responsibility around the thought of having to support children emotionally and mentally at school when they return. How can we make sure that those who are working with our children and young people are supported to be able to help them have public health as a priority?
Wow, you give me the easy one. So let me just break it down. I really think that, you know, public health is just one part of a health solution. I don't want to get hung up on disciplines. I think everybody has seen how important health is. It's a massive issue. So we're all working in some ways towards health and wellness. And I think what I would say in response to that is, and you know, going on the back of what Jack was saying, I think it depends what kind of society we want to live in. And I think it's, I'm viewing a lot of interesting things that are happening internationally, whether it's in New Zealand or Iceland or Norway or Finland or Denmark, generally smaller countries run by women, and particularly younger women. And I just think that, you know, if we carry on measuring our modes of educational or societal success by blunt instruments like GDP, then we'll carry on getting what we have at the moment. If we want to shift a little bit more and have more social, more meaningful measures of what we're trying to work towards, then I think we can start to shift some change. And I think the younger generation, I've got a 14-year-old son, he's so angry and active about the things that are going on in life just now, and he really thinks that the things that my generation have done, baby boomers, have really busted for other people. And I think that he is wanting to see a much more caring world about the climate, about well-being, about addressing inequalities and more equalities, particularly around race and culture and sexuality. And I think we need to start measuring the right things, and schools need to perhaps start measuring and valuing some other attributes. And we support our teachers to do that. We are not an academic machine. We are treating the next generation of preciously, and they're a gift, and we need to develop and grow them in ways that will benefit society and not just themselves. So I think it depends on what we value. And I think this initiative, and by putting a focus on prevention, you can start looking at the things that really matter rather than measuring the things that don't matter.
Thank you, Gregor. That's an excellent point to finish on. And as we sort of move forward over the next 12 months, what we're doing is asking people and all our sort of professionals across the South London area to think about what we do value, what we do want to focus on, how we do want to support children and young people. So at this point, we're sort of asking for everyone involved to commit to the people of South London to say that the organisations that you represent are committed to that work and supporting children and young people. So we're asking that of you now, which will hopefully be a yes. And so we've come to the end of our breakout session now. if you'll see in the Q&A section for the delegates, you can return to the main session to hear the closing remarks of the Mental Health Prevention Summit. Please click the link that's now in the Q&A section. This will remain after we've ended the breakout session. A final big thank you to all of our presenters, especially Ezra and Sophia, and thank you to you all for joining this discussion. I'm going to end the session now. The link will still be active, so please do click that and rejoin the main session. Thank you.
Thank you.